environment. We also must give significant attention to those in underserved areas and in very rural areas. We're all in this together. A few housekeeping items, if I may. Please use the chat function to get to know the other attendees. We know that participating in a 90-minute webinar is not conventional. If you were in an in-person conference, you would talk to your fellow attendees and develop new ideas and relationships. In addition to networking, please use the chat to share any aha moments you may have during the webinar. Please use the Q&A function with questions for our presenters. This will help our moderators. We have an amazing lineup of speakers today. You will surely leave here learning something new. You can see the lineup of speakers on the screen now. Excuse me just a moment. And each will introduce themselves more fully after a short intro from the moderator. Before we jump into our keynote presentation, let's learn a bit more about your interests and needs. Here is the response to the poll question that was on the screen when we started. So the question, why is access to high-speed internet so important to you? Obviously, the poll demonstrates a 49% take on remote work, with education coming in as a second at 26%. The other is. Thank you for contributing to that survey. If you didn't get a chance to answer the poll question, please feel free to write your answer in the chat and it will be calculated into the percentages reflected. So now it is my distinct pleasure and my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Chris Mitchell. He is the director of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance Community Broadband Networks Initiative. So Chris, welcome. We're so pleased to have you with us this morning.
Thank you so much, Lori. It's really exciting to be here. I'm really impressed with the work that AARP has been doing around broadband, both with the national team as well as many of the state teams I've had some pleasure to interact with. And it's exciting to talk about this with people that care deeply about their communities. I'm with a place called the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, and I'm going to describe that in a minute. But first, I'm going to share my slides, and let's pull that up right here. Oh, I'm disabled temporarily from sharing my screen, and now it's fixed. That was quick. And there we go. So now I'd like to start off by talking a little bit about technology in a way that should reassure you that this is not going to be the kind of a talk where you will start to fall asleep and be confused by jargon. I like to situate ourselves in history, which is to say that right now we're in a challenging part. I think if you look back at electrification, it went through this part and no one really talks about it in the history books. They talk about how electricity started getting big in the cities, and then eventually they had some good policies in the states and the federal level, and then everyone got electricity around World War II and a little after. And there's a whole lot of years in between there where people struggled through in the way that we are right now. Ultimately, though, everyone will have high quality broadband access. I fully believe that. The actions that you all take in your communities can help make sure that that happens sooner rather than later. And I like to start with that message of hope that we are going to get there. And I like to say that, the kind of people who know how many amps are coming into their house and think about that, and they're very technical in that way, probably also are very happy to talk about gigabits and megabits and all of those words. I'm very happy to talk about those things, but you don't have to know all about those things to participate in these conversations. Anyone who uses water should be able to use the internet. Ultimately, we should be able to buy devices, come home, and just know that they will work on our connection, and we won't have to worry about congestion. The little phrase I like to use is that we don't turn off our lights to use our toasters, and our internet access should support any range of normal activities that we would want to do. Now, it's important to note as we talk about this, though, like what is the necessary connection for a household in order to do all of the things we talk about: telehealth, doing remote education, working from home, all of these sorts of things. We're not talking about an internet connection to your home that can just support one of those things. Households have many people in them, and they have even more devices in them. And those devices sometimes all need data at the same time. So we need a high quality connection that can make sure that every device is able to use the internet at the same time without creating congestion. And I like to note sometimes that this includes entertainment devices. Like, entertainment is an important part of the economy. It's an important part of our lives, and we shouldn't feel like we're gonna somehow benefit society by just trying to do the minimum that would allow people to work from home. We need to make sure that we have good connections. That's the focus of our work at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance around broadband. And I hope it'll be the focus that you can use rather than centering on the exact amount of megabits or gigabits, which I think is important for policymakers and others to dig into. But at the local level, not everyone needs to feel like that. And I think it's important to say that because in this space, some people use that knowledge as a weapon. They use it to make people feel small and like they shouldn't participate because they don't know enough. And that's ridiculous. We all should be participating in these conversations to the extent that we want to. And we can all learn plenty to be able to participate well. My organization is 47 years old. It's older than I am by a little bit. And we have started working on broadband about 15 years ago. I've guided that work for most of those years. And our organization broadly believes that we do well when decisions are made closer to home. We think there's better incentives. We think people take greater responsibility when they know that their decisions will impact themselves. And we work in a variety of areas. In broadband, we are in an area where the local governments have little control over regulation. So no local government can tell AT&T or a cable company that they have to provide access to a certain place. Local governments cannot require levels of reliability. They can't require certain price points. So from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, we looked at this and said, well, if they cannot require it, then we need to find ways in which they are able to have an influence. And so we focus on municipal ownership, on cooperative ownership, and other policies that local governments can embrace to try to make sure that they have that high quality access that they need. And we work all around the nation on these policies. Now, I like to start by borrowing a slide. It's a wonderful slide from National Digital Inclusion Alliance, a great organization that has a very active listserv where if you get inspired by this, it's a great place to plug in and see what people are talking about in rural and urban areas across the nation. They remind us that the problem of people not being connected to the internet is not just one of rural areas. I think the most obvious reason that a household may not be connected to the internet is because there is no connection available for miles. Even if you have $1 million, you cannot get connected to the internet. And that is one significant problem. However, there are many more Americans for whom a connection is technically available, but they are either not able to take advantage of it, perhaps it's too expensive, or they do not have the digital skills and confidence or devices to take advantage of it. These are all important issues that government and organizations have to tackle in order to make sure that everyone can use the internet. Now, these numbers are based on a survey, and I wouldn't fixate on those, but we do believe it is roughly 3 times as many people who cannot take advantage of the internet for cost reasons as it is for reasons that the network is not available to them. And that's an important thing to remember. This is true in both rural and urban areas where people cannot afford it. We tried to talk about the lack of access when it comes down to no infrastructure, no connection that's physically present, as a lack of availability. And then we often talk about digital skills or affordability for areas where there is a connection available and people are not taking advantage of it for other reasons. So that's a little bit of the background, and no one knows what the real numbers are because the Federal Communications Commission has done a very poor job of tracking this. There is a sense that every year I feel like they tell us that they're taking it more seriously, and yet we've never had credible numbers come out. So we don't actually know where the access is available, and no one is really proposing tracking what the prices are. And so even once we know where access is available, we may not know how much it costs and how many people are locked out for lack of ability to pay. I think it's important to note that because there's a sense that broadband is incredibly expensive. And when I say that, I mean to build. Certainly in some areas where you may have to pay $100 as a household for a connection that might not be that great, that's expensive. But there's a sense that the reason for that is because it's so expensive to build. And it is expensive to build, but it's also not expensive to build, which is an odd thing to say. But when you compare the cost of building a broadband line to building an electric line, building a water line, a sewer line, a road, even a sidewalk, a lot of times the internet is cheaper to extend than those other infrastructures. And when it comes to telehealth, it's worth noting that just diverting one person from the ER, from the emergency room, will save enough money to pay for more than a year's worth of connectivity for that person, and saving them from an unneeded admission after a surgery or other kind of intervention may pay for 5 years worth of internet access, because ultimately healthcare is incredibly expensive, and broadband might only cost between $500 to $1,000 per year per family to keep them connected. And so it's worth noting that there's expensive and then there's expensive. And we need to figure out how to make sure that we can have cost savings in one area that helps to justify building out these networks. That's work that a number of people are doing over the course of the next few years, I think, particularly after the pandemic, that's really interesting and should help all of us to make sure that we can drive those connections to areas that don't have it sooner, as well as making it more affordable for people. I want to also note, this isn't just an area where it's too expensive to build in rural areas, and that's why it's not there. That doesn't really explain it. This is Kentucky, and this is data that's 5 years old now. So there's actually much more. But the blue areas are where we have the highest quality technology, fiber to the home. Often it's been built by cooperatives, telephone cooperatives mostly. Sometimes electric cooperatives now are taking a greater role. Sometimes cities themselves. I'll talk more about that. And in other cases, big companies, Windstream, Cincinnati Bell, AT&T, they've certainly built out in more urban areas typically. And also small local private companies will build out and do a good job of serving people. Sometimes they're using federal subsidies. Often it's some sort of mixture, but often what spurs them is a sense of responsibility to the community. And I like to just note that we'll see this in a couple of different maps here, but the high cost of building in areas does not explain where broadband is. Now, as we talk about community networks, which is what I tend to track and work on, and what I think is a tremendously promising approach for making sure networks are affordable as well as available in rural areas, we break them into 3 different kinds of community networks. And these are networks that are broadly accountable to the public in ways that other networks aren't. And it's a continuum. There's local private companies, like I said, that are very rooted in the community and act like this, as well as some cooperatives that don't act in a way that's as accountable to the community, unfortunately. So I'm not saying that this is a perfect line, but we tend to focus on cooperative networks, which are networks where the people who own the service basically set the management by electing a board. They have a vote and a board, and they set that. And then the other is a municipal network, where a city or a county would often own the asset and make decisions about it. If they make bad decisions, then one could elect officials that will run on a platform of making better decisions to make sure the community is well served. This is a map of where we see community networks, and we're working on turning this into something that's a bit easier on a slide, because I'm guessing some of you are squinting at your monitor. This will be better when you receive the slide deck, which I'm happy to share, and you can look a little bit more closely. But the point is that there's a lot of these, more than people realize. We're approaching 200 cities that have citywide service. Some of those cities have 4,500 people, and a few of them have more than 1,000, more than 100,000 people. And there's a lot of cities where they have built out to a part of the community, like a business district. So there's a lot of different models, and we also track tribal networks, which I think are not as big a role in the Appalachians as some other parts of the country. But there's a lot of excitement around tribal networks right now because they're finally getting some federal support. This is a map that shows where broadly community networks have been built and are being built. The darker areas, the dark orange and the dark purple, is where the networks were with data that is about 4 years old now, 3 years old. And as you can see, there's a lot of rural areas, particularly in the Dakotas, that have fiber optic access. These are extremely low density areas. And I'll be honest, I mean, they're still cheaper to build than in the mountains. But you can look in Kentucky, you can see there's a little bit more of the fiber to the home there with the dark orange. The dark orange is the telephone cooperatives. Green are municipal fiber networks, and purple is the electric cooperatives that have done it. The lighter shade of purple and the lighter shade of orange is where they are building, or where they were building at the time that we made this map, and where they have money to build. And so those are areas that will soon be connected. And actually, what's interesting is most of Mississippi, a lot of Arkansas are now covered too. We just haven't been able to update the data yet. So I put this up there to demonstrate, again, this is not just about the cost of building. It's about the willingness and the policy of where we choose to put both federal dollars and local dollars and energy. Now, as we talk about community networks, and when I say this, it's more about the municipal networks. They can be politically controversial. The idea of a local government getting into the broadband business strikes some people as odd. And the big cable and telephone companies have found a message that really resonates with more conservative members of the legislatures in our states, as well as in the federal government, in which they argue that cities should not be allowed to build their own networks. And one of the reasons that they will use is that they fail often and that they're no good because local governments aren't good at this. They haven't figured it out. And I like to pause here to say that local governments have to take this seriously if they're going to get involved. And when they do, they absolutely can do a great job. There have been some local governments that didn't do as good of a job, and we're candid about that. We need to make sure that people take it seriously if they're going to make an investment of this scale. But what we see when we look at the fastest connections across the United States is that community networks tend to do way better than the big cable and telephone companies who are trying to outlaw the municipal networks and also try to hobble some of the cooperative networks. The top 10 networks in the US, according to PC Magazine, of them, 3 are municipal networks where the city owns and operates the service. And of the other 7, all of them are companies that either partner with or use public infrastructure in some way in some of the markets that they operate in. And I think that's really interesting because it's a real sign that local governments have a good role to play here. And when they do it thoughtfully, they can build some of the best networks in the nation. And that may be they do it themselves or they work with a partner, but they can really do impressive work and they can keep it affordable too. One of these examples is in Wilson, North Carolina. Wilson was not the earliest. They were a little bit early, and I like to highlight them because they didn't really get much help from the state or the federal government. And in fact, the state, pushed by the company that was then called Time Warner Cable, is now Charter Spectrum, has made it all but impossible for anyone else to build a network like this. And they refused to allow Wilson to expand their network in Eastern North Carolina to connect neighbors that don't even have internet access. That's except for dial-up or satellite. Some of the states have these laws. We'll talk about that in a second. But Wilson has built a remarkable network. Like most of the citywide networks, it has paid all of its debts with revenues from the subscribers that they have connected. They've connected a majority of the community. And I think all of the top 10 businesses in town all use the Wilson network. So these networks are remarkably successful. We have an in-depth case study about this one and several others. Now, I'd like to also note Chattanooga. Chattanooga is one of the more famous ones. Sometimes People treat it like it's an outlier and not something that can be easily replicated because it got federal dollars. It had a plan to build the network over 10 years, which started before our economy fell apart in 2007 and 2008. And when that happened, they got money from the Department of Energy to build the coolest electrical grid that mankind could imagine. And they got more than $100 million. They put that into the electric grid, into these really great devices that would allow them to recover very fast after tornadoes and other severe weather, as well as other outages. And over 10 years, they have generated $2.7 billion in local value, according to university calculations. This is, in fact, an outlier, but it's because Chattanooga's electric utility is extremely well run. Many utilities are well run, but Chattanooga sort of stands above many of them. And this is a sense of what can be done. They have not only connected, I mean, like 60% of the market now chooses them over Comcast or AT&T. And they've also just last summer started connecting 17,000 families that have children in the school and free lunch program. With a free high quality connection. That is remarkable. It's unlike anything we've seen anywhere else. And just a reminder that some of these areas we'll talk about are quite rural. Other cities have a tremendous need, even though connections may be available from the private sector. There's still a need for public investment that's smart. Just yesterday, last night, I spoke with Christy Batts, who's in Clarksville, Tennessee. We talked about their network, and it's worth noting, again, I'm a little defensive because many of you, if you go talk about this with other people, you may find claims that these networks can't pay for themselves or they're disasters. Clarksville actually really struggled for a lot of years, and they just finished paying off their telecom debt, which is quite remarkable. The electric customers haven't seen a rate increase in 10 years. The profits from the telecom division have actually been paying for significant electrical upgrades in the area. And so for people that are on fixed incomes, whether you're in a rural or an urban area, making sure that the electric grid can take advantage of telecommunications technology, and then also having telecommunications profits that can go to subsidize the costs of electricity, can keep costs low for everyone and keep the reliability up. Later on today, we're going to hear about what Knoxville is doing. And Knoxville is another reminder that even cities that have pretty decent cable coverage and perhaps some competition here and there with fiber networks, which is the highest quality type of network, they're still looking at this for affordability reasons and others, but we'll hear more about that from one of the following speakers. So that's on one end of the continuum, where a community, whether it's a big urban one or a smaller, more rural one, or an entire county, might build a network that connects everyone. That's a very significant investment, and it's a little bit easier today because of support from the federal government and the American Rescue Plan, as well as other money that's coming available that can be used for broadband. But there is another approach, which is on the other end of the continuum, and that is putting up free wireless points, whether that's in parking lots so people can go there in their cars as a stopgap. We ultimately need to make sure everyone's connected in the home. And in other areas, we see networks that are built around high poverty areas, hoping that some of that connection will seep into people's homes. But at least they would have to just go to a local park or something rather than some other place. So there's a variety of approaches that fall under the community network umbrella, from on one end, city, county, putting a massive, multi-million, multi-$10 million investment into a city that may be cobbling together hundreds of thousands of dollars, or a community in which they can build some wireless that's going to bring decent connectivity to people for free who can access it. Now, one of the things that we see happening in a variety of places, sometimes for ideological reasons and other times for more practical reasons, is where a local government would actually focus on building the physical network infrastructure, but not offer services directly. The networks I talked about earlier, Chattanooga, Knoxville, Clarksville, They're all situations in which the city both builds a network and then operates it, selling services. But they don't have to do that. They can actually build a network and let others compete on that network for services. That's something called open access. And there's an interesting network called Utopia in Utah, which again had made massive mistakes. The early pioneers of this often made significant mistakes. And what's interesting is they've recovered from them. So for a while, they were hemorrhaging cash. Now they've gone 10 years without having to use any taxpayer support. And they are one of the most popular networks. They are the most popular network in Utah. So I bring that up because both there's a model for the city not being involved or the county not being involved with the management of the network in terms of delivering services, but also because some of the things that we see that are considered failures are fixed and then they do much better. There's a link here to a video that we did. It's a 20-minute in-depth video about this, and it's well worth it, I think, to get a sense of public safety impacts and some other impacts. One other thing that we see is a focus on public housing. Where cities may not be able to build a network out to everyone, it may make sense to focus on targeted investments to public housing. Maybe that's a small apartment building. Maybe it's a whole campus that has 100,000 people in New York City. But in this case, the city of San Francisco worked with a private provider, and the city was able to leverage some of its talents and make sure that they made smart investments that enabled that private provider to deliver a high quality, very high quality connection at $10 a month, and that was actually charged to the building owner, to the property owner, which in this case is a nonprofit organization, rather than to the residents themselves. And that was something that wasn't really subsidized on an ongoing basis, because if you make the right investments in an environment where you have significant density, you can offer a continual service for $10 or $15 a month without losing money. There's a number of assumptions, and we can talk more about that later, or you can follow up with me later on. So then there's another approach still yet, which is where a city might just partner with one local company that does a good job, and the city might borrow money and bond for it, or use American Rescue Plan dollars or some other source of federal funds, and they could build a network, and they would then have a lease to that company, which would cover the cost of repaying any debt that was incurred. This has been done in Minnesota in multiple cases that we've written about, as well as in New Hampshire, and we may see it in a few other places. Frankly, I think Windstream is interested in this in some areas. There's some bigger companies that are starting to look at it. And so we always prefer to partner with the local companies, but there's also other opportunities out there for places if you can't find a local company to work with in some cases. So again, I want to just emphasize there's not one model for this. There's a lot of models, and we haven't finished creating models either yet. There's still some new innovation out there, I think, that we'll see. In many cases, like for instance, in Wilson and Clarksville, taxpayers are not charged for building a network. In other cases, they choose to be. So in the case of this small township in rural Michigan, they chose to raise their property taxes to help pay for a network. And it's also true in Leverett, Massachusetts, another small community that's in a university town. In those cases, people really didn't actually end up paying more. And we see this in Minnesota as well, where a network struggled and did use property tax support to help pay all of its debts while it was delivering a high quality service. What happens is the property taxes might go up a bit, but often people were already paying $70 or $80 a month for an inferior broadband service, and that price came down by a similar amount than what their taxes went up. In any case, in many of those examples, people were happy to make that trade-off because they just desperately needed that service. We have a link here to a great documentary that we helped to fund, candidly, from WRAL in North Carolina, about how North Carolina restricts local governments from building networks. Virginia also has some restrictions, and so does Tennessee. North Carolina's are the worst in this area, basically impossible for cities to really build, and it's very hard for them to partner. In Virginia, there's some processes people can get through. It's just unnecessary. And Tennessee also does not allow these cities to expand. And so Chattanooga has neighbors who do not have broadband, and Chattanooga is not allowed to help connect them. Even the states have literally decided that they would prefer to give private companies taxpayer dollars than to allow these cities to expand their networks at no cost to taxpayers. And that gives you a sense of how muddled the politics are on this, because often conservatives would rather be more interested in trying to make sure that they aren't using taxpayer dollars, but in this case somehow it's seen as better to use taxpayer dollars for private companies than to allow local governments to solve the problem in a way that doesn't even cost taxpayer dollars anything, often because they can borrow money and then repay it with the revenues that they generate from the network. So there's barriers. There's 19 states that had barriers as of last year. Arkansas got rid of theirs and Washington got rid of theirs over the course of the last year, which is truly remarkable. In Arkansas, it was a very conservative legislature that unanimously decided to get rid of all their barriers because they wanted to make sure that communities had a full range of opportunities to make sure they had the connections that they needed. And I'm nearly finished. I was hoping to get done earlier so we'd have more time for Q&A, but I've just got a couple slides left. There are approaches that are interesting that may involve using some public dollars and creating a new cooperative. Creating a new cooperative is very attractive in terms of avoiding the potential costs or the risks to taxpayers, or if people just culturally don't want government to be involved. And creating a new cooperative is therefore pretty attractive. However, it is difficult because no one wants to lend money, especially tens of millions of dollars, to an entity that has no operating experience. So cities could actually provide startup funding, whether through American Rescue Plan dollars or other things. And we cover this, how they did this in Minnesota to get this cooperative started, and what a success it's been. I'm not going to go too deep on this, but I do want to make it clear. You might hear about 5G, you might hear about other wireless things, you might hear about Starlink and low Earth orbit satellites. I think all these things are really cool. And all these things are going to do great things for us in the future. We're all going to be using them ultimately in the future. None of them change any of the things I've talked about. None of these technologies will bring the kind of jobs and connections to your communities that you need to make sure everyone can be connected in an affordable manner. So don't be fooled by shiny talk and how there's new technologies. For 25 years, we've been told new technology was going to solve this problem, and it hasn't. We need smart organizing and well thought out public investments to resolve this. Now, I wanted to leave you again. This is a slide I think that would be more useful for you later to go down these, but these are 3 places to learn more about the funding opportunities. There's never been a better time to be trying to figure out how to fund this at the local level. There's more money available from the federal government. There's money available from the states. A lot of this money from the federal government will go through the states. And so you want to keep an eye on how states develop programs on that. In Southeast Ohio, it's going to be really hard to build a network along what I talked about because the state doesn't allow you to get a lot of that money. And so that's another place where you see some restrictions in terms of how money flows as opposed to just what communities can do. And feel free to follow me. We do newsletters. We have I'm pretty active on Twitter, and I also do a podcast called Broadband Bits, which is available on all kinds of platforms. And we have one next week. I think that was actually 2 weeks out, with someone from Oates, which is an organization that helps seniors to make sure that they are well connected. And I know that ties right into what we're going to be talking about in a few minutes with the cyber seniors approach, which is exciting because I think the internet is so cool. We need to make sure everyone can take full advantage of it. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That was great. I'm impressed. You may be one of the few people I know who can do 30 minutes in only 3 breaths. You've covered
I recommend recording it and playing it back at half speed. I keep trying to slow down and I just fail.
You've given us a lot to consider and talk about, and we do have a number of questions. I'm Alan Briggs. I'm a volunteer with the ARP North Carolina. And you have queued up several of our panelists for the next segment. I'm sure that Representative Johnson is getting ready to respond to your questions about the state regulations and restrictions. And several of you asked questions about restrictions in your respective states. So I'm going to defer those questions because we do have panelists later in the program who will be talking more specifically about their state and local activities and the encounters that they have with state restrictions. So those of you who asked those questions, hope you'll be patient. We do have a number, and if I don't get to them all, please forgive me, but I want to try to cluster a few of these for Chris in the time we do have. Several people asked about affordability and wondered if there were any documentation of the respective costs of to the subscribers between these municipal and cooperative efforts versus the private cable companies?
Yes, it's a difficult question to answer in part because fees for telecommunications services are notoriously opaque. You get advertised one rate, and then certain providers will then tack on multiple other things, certain fees and things like that. What we are actually working on right now is something we're going to publish soon, in which we found that municipalities and cooperatives are tend to be better about being clear in their advertising about what the actual rates are. And that's helpful. And often those rates are lower when they're more honest about it, because usually you hide fees when it starts getting too expensive. Harvard did a study several years ago in which they looked at overall, do municipal networks charge less for internet service? It's a very hard study because cable companies in particular are very opaque about what they charge, and they charge different people different things. You and your neighbor might have the same service and you might pay dramatically different things for it. As best they could tell in that study, that municipalities did charge less for services. So that's our sense. And then in the Tennessee Valley, where we've seen a lot of municipal networks, we looked at it and we found that many of them went 5 to 10 years without ever raising rates. And so even if municipalities might start off pretty comparable, over time, they'll often be less. Now, cooperatives, the electric cooperatives, some of them are offering $40 or $50 a month. It's actually cheaper in like northwestern Missouri to get fiber than you can get in any major city. So that's all over the board as well. But the main thing is that we have something called the Emergency Broadband Benefit from the federal government, and AARP has really great resources on how to get people signed up for that, and that makes most of these connections more affordable.
That's interesting. Another question came up about that. If this has been so successful for a number of municipalities and cooperatives, why are more of them not taking the lead? I know that some states have the restrictions, but are there other impediments?
Yes, most of the cities that have done this are cities that have municipal electricity, and most cities in the United States do not. There's about 2,000 of those, and about, I'd say, more than a third of them have moved forward with some kind of plan on this. And I would just say it's very challenging and intimidating for local officials in an environment where they are lobbied very heavily not to do this. But we are seeing dramatically increased in interest, and we've seen many more networks being built over the past 5 years.
Well, we're getting tight on time, but real quickly, since we are a nonprofit, you mentioned at the outset about the role of nonprofits. Can you quickly describe some activities we might undertake as AARP or other nonprofits?
Yes, I think the most important one is to keep educating people. We need to build digital skills. We need to make sure that people have confidence to use the internet effectively. Many of us who have used it for a long time forget how scary it is when you're trying to figure out, do I put my social security into this form or do I not put it into that form? You don't really know what's going where. So I think that's important. And the other thing is to just keep engaging with local leaders to make sure they understand there might be money coming down from the federal government, but it's not going to come forever, and it needs to be spent wisely. If you just hand it over to AT&T or to some other company that might not have local interest in mind, you could lose a major opportunity here. So we have to make smart plans on how we spend this money.
Well, thank you, Chris. We could go on for a good while, obviously, and we will. And for those of you who did ask questions, particularly about some of the state restrictions and so on, we will have an opportunity to get into that in the next portion of our program. And as we prepare to make that segue, I'm going to queue up a video from Grayson County, Virginia, one of the success stories that many of us look at across the country. And then we will turn it over to my colleague, Sarah Knapp, to introduce our panel for the rest of the program. Thanks again, Chris.
I have 2 daughters. They are twins. They are 2 years old, and their names are Keisha and Lydia. When my daughters were born, Lydia was diagnosed with pulmonary stenosis with pulmonary hypertension of the lungs. If she gets hurt, then she'll cry, and where her oxygen's low, she'll pass out because it drops even lower. It's very nerve-wracking because you don't know if it's from the injury or not. And our internet connection is not reliable, so I can't make phone calls, even for emergencies. I can't call my parents. I can't even call my husband. I can't call nobody for help.
I've been farming my whole life. My dad started in the 40s, and because I don't have a good internet service and I don't have cell phone service, I have to drive to our cemetery, and sometimes I can't do either from there, but that's the only place we have any kind of service in the community. We miss orders because people just can't really contact us. You know, it's really frustrating.
Bringing internet service to rural areas is quite a complex challenge, and complex challenges require a lot of partnerships. We had local elected officials that stepped up to the plate who put policies in place that would allow us to go build this network. And a corporate partner like Facebook, is able to bring in their large network and suppliers and help facilitate this. Without these partners, we would not be having success in building fiber today.
Some of the complex issues with Grayson County getting internet access to everyone is the terrain. We're full of mountains, trees. It's a few hours away from several major cities, and it's significantly more expensive to get connectivity to each home in a rural setting. Appalachia came along and offered to build fiber along their utility poles. That basically brought that cost down and made fiber to the home a possibility. So we immediately began working with them to get a direct fiber connection to most everyone. This project is the first in the nation to take this approach.
We are pulling fiber and attaching that to power poles along the routes here in Grayson County. And then Gigabeam will actually splice that fiber and provide access points to provide the service to the customers. About 6,000 residences and businesses will be able to get high-speed internet service that doesn't have it today. Some of them are schools, some of them are emergency responding facilities that don't have proper service today.
We're building 238 miles of fiber throughout the county. It opens up opportunities for everyone here and hopefully encourages people to continue to live here and more people to move into the area and build business here.
Early next year.
Yeah, there's more to that video if you want to check on it online at the Grayson County site. But first want to introduce myself. I'm Sarah Knapp. I'm a volunteer with AARP North Carolina, the Mountain Region. And I had the pleasure of introducing and moderating the panel discussion today. And so as you will see, today's panelists will provide local insights on efforts to extend the reach of broadband infrastructure, but they will also talk about how within the communities they're helping older adults gain skills that are necessary to effectively use the internet and computer technology. So you really get a broad spectrum of the view of internet deployment and the benefits that it can provide to the community. So let's get the panel started. We'll start with Cardwell, who is the Director of Information Technology with Grayson County. And so he can elaborate more on the development of the infrastructure that was highlighted in the video that you just watched. Hey, Carl.
Thank you, Sarah. So yeah, the video, that's exciting. And I tell you, every time I see it, I still get teary-eyed because the need is out there. And we've had that need for a long time. And Grayson County is as a very rural area. We've had a kind of a trend of a declining population over the last several years. And, we were had to reverse that. And one way of reversing that is with broadband infrastructure. Now, let me get my, trying to share my screen here with I know there is, let's see, start from the beginning. There we go. All right. So again, my name is Carl Cardwell. I'm the IT director for Grayson County. I'm also involved with economic development and with our GIS. And in this presentation, I am hoping that I can condense 4 years of work into 5 minutes. So we'll get started. First, I'm going to start with a polling question. for everybody here. What is the tallest mountain in Virginia? And I'll give you a hint. They're in Grayson County, so it's in Grayson County. And I'll give a minute for people to kind of get that in there. Let's see. All right, I'm seeing the polls coming in. I'll give it a few more minutes, or actually a few more seconds. All right, the answer is Mount Rogers. Mount Rogers is the tallest mountain in Virginia. It's in Grayson County, Grayson Highlands. It's 5,728 feet. That gives you an idea of how the terrain is, and this picture here kind of shows that. What makes our county so beautiful with the mountains and rivers also makes it more challenging for broadband infrastructure. Starting from the beginning, in 2018, the county formed a broadband committee. Our county administrator, Bill Shepley, met with our supervisors and asked them, what was their most important thing for the county? And most of them said broadband infrastructure, especially our supervisor, John Fant. And so when we formed the broadband committee, we contracted Sandy Terry with Rural Broadband Consulting to perform a broadband assessment. And through that assessment, we found out that 57% of the county was unserved. Now, when I say unserved, there is some service in areas, but it was not reliable at all. A lot of DSL connections that have been overextended were failing to meet the needs of people. And in some areas, there is no connection at all. 50% of those, the area, or 50% of our public safety facilities are in unserved areas, meaning they have no connection to the internet or very little connection. So after we did an analysis of our needs, we started the process of selecting a WISP, a wireless internet service provider, because that was the route we needed to go. We figured in a mountainous terrain, wireless would probably be the only option that we have. And while we were doing this selection, Appalachian Power, or American Electric Power, Appalachian Power to us, they were working on expanding their smart grid with fiber. And they wanted to do a pilot project in Grayson County with their broadband capacity pilot program, which would they would hang fiber off of their existing infrastructure that would offer middle mile fiber that another service provider can connect to and bring fiber to the home. And that was just a game changer for us. That brought us, I mean, if it wasn't for that, we would still be 10 years behind. While we were doing that and get selected for that, we selected Gigabee Networks to partner with the expansion of broadband throughout the county. The next year, in May of 2019, Governor Ralph Northam signed into law allowing power utility companies to provide middle mile fiber in Virginia. Appalachian Power submitted their plan after that to the State Corporation Commission for approval. And that was the start of our partnership here. We partnered with the county, partnered with Appalachian Power and with Gigabeam to tackle this challenge of supplying broadband internet into Grayson County. A quick timeline from when we first started, it was kind of trial and error. It was kind of learning as we go. The SCC process did kind of prolong it. I know when we made the announcement in 2019, it was kind of silent because we were waiting for this to happen. Finally, at the end of 2020 is when, after the plan and Appalachian Power began to bid out the fiber infrastructure. And we're at the point now that Gigabeam, our partner, can start building out their to the homes. This gives you an idea of how significant this fiber project is. This is Grayson County here. You see our funding areas, and those are public funding areas, but the infrastructure for the fiber routes reaches all throughout Grayson County. So it's just a huge undertaking and a major game changer that will significantly improve the lives of many citizens in Grayson County. You know, in the video, we talked about an estimated 237.5 miles of fiber to be installed in Grayson County. And as of September 30th, we have 40% of that fiber installed. That, you know, that, I mean, we're almost halfway there. And it's just been exciting. I know people here, the population, that I get calls every day asking when it's coming, when can I get connected? And you know, it's exciting. I know those are the challenges that we had to face, and I know everybody has their own different challenges, but that's the approach that we took. And you know, I can talk about broadband all day and what we're doing here, and I'd love, you know, if anybody wants to reach out to me, I'd be glad to share information with you. Thank you so much.
Great, good. Thank you so much, Carl. We're next going to hear from Tamarah Holmes, who is with the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development. Tamarah?
Good morning. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
All right. So if my slide deck can come up.
Yep. Well,
are you seeing your slide deck, Tamarah, up?
Not yet. All right. You can actually go ahead and skip to the third slide. Thank you, Rebecca. All right. So as it has been said, I'm Tamarah Holmes. I actually have the pleasure of serving as the director of the Office of Broadband at the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development. And I just wanted to share a little bit about our state efforts around trying to get folks connected to internet. And just my first couple of slides kind of talk about our strategy within Virginia. So as we all know, having access to the internet actually has a great economic impact. Chris kind of talked about it earlier today. And I just wanted to share some stats regarding access in Virginia. So if, according to the US Chamber of Commerce, if we increase connectivity in Virginia, our economic growth will be impacted tremendously. And I'm not going to read the slide verbatim, but it does impact our ability to generate revenue around sales, add jobs to our economy, and then also increase wages. And one of the biggest things that it has an impact within Virginia, based on a USDA study from 2019, if you all are familiar with the Commonwealth of Virginia, which I'm pretty sure is the same thing in North Carolina and Tennessee, our economy around agriculture is a good percentage of our economy in the Commonwealth. And we would be able to increase the economic benefit by 18% based on production, with our communities having access to internet, which would result in about almost $17 billion in output for Virginia. Next slide, please. So around the digital divide, I know we have a lot of stats, and Chris did a great job. Thank you, Chris, for talking about the impact across the country. In Virginia, there was a study done at the beginning of the pandemic that approximately 12% of our K through 12 and college students don't have access to the internet. And we know that it also impacts our elderly population. And a lot of folks want to be able to age in place. There's a lot of great benefits to having access to telehealth and telemental health resources. And then also our veterans population would benefit from having access to broadband as well. Next slide. So in Virginia, Governor Northam set a goal of universal coverage in the Commonwealth back in 2018. And it's been a top priority for his administration. And one of the things that's been interesting, and I'll go over our American Rescue Plan in a couple of seconds, but we've actually closed half the digital divide in Virginia. When we started this out in 2018, there were about almost 500,000 locations within Virginia that did not have access. We're currently down to 233,500 locations that still lack access. And this is access solely related to infrastructure. So our universal goal was set by Governor Northam back in 2018 to basically solve the problem by 2028. And what's happened in the last couple of months, actually back in July, Governor Northam made an announcement that he proposed that $700 million in the American Rescue Plan funding would be used to support broadband. And then the General Assembly in their session also agreed with this proposal and approved the allocation of $700 million. Now, what this did was accelerate our goal to 2024. So we're looking to have all projects and funds committed by 2024. So we're looking to have Virginia have universal coverage by then. So our plan happens along 3 tracks. 1, policy solutions, which Chris talked about earlier, local planning support, which I'll share a little more in detail about that momentarily, and direct grants to public-private partnerships for last mile deployment to make the math work. And all of these are supported by a coalition that we have called the Commonwealth Connect Coalition. And there are about 130 members of this coalition. And these are organizations that range from the Virginia Service Association to the Virginia Municipal League. So these are organizations that support the state's effort in getting broadband expansion completed. So just to share a little bit about our Office of Broadband, we have 4 main functions. 1 is to assist communities with broadband planning. You heard Carl talk a little bit about the work that Grayson County had done around developing a broadband plan. We also work with community stakeholders, whether it's a local government, whether it's a nonprofit organization, whether it's some of our tribal communities, to not only access our state funding, but also access federal funding. And we do have, I think there are 7 federally recognized Native American tribes in Virginia now. So we do work with our tribes to access funding at the federal level as well. And then our last 2 pieces are really important. Go back, one more. Okay, our last 2 things are really important is administering the VODI program. And in government, we have an acronym for everything. So VODI stands for the Virginia Telecommunication Initiative, and that's the $700 million program I talked about earlier. So we provide a lot of technical assistance, both pre and post application, and then we do manage the grants once they're funded. And then the last piece is the oversight of a state broadband map. We've had a state broadband map that goes back to 2008, but we recently received funding last summer to build a new map with our partners at Virginia Tech, and we're in the process of doing that now. Next slide. So let me just give you a little bit about the VODI program. It is Virginia's largest broadband infrastructure program. We require that units of local government apply in partnership with internet service providers. So a unit of local government in Virginia is a school district, a county, a town, a city, planning district commission. All of those are considered units of local government. And actually our applications are under review right now. Next slide. So just to kind of share with you really quickly, and I won't go through the entire slide, the program has been around since 2017, and it does predate Governor Northam's goal set back in 2018. However, he's made significant investments in the VODI program. In this slide, I'm not going to read it verbatim, but since the program has been established, we've been able to connect over 78,000 Virginians to have access to broadband pre-pandemic. Next slide. So this is just a map of Virginia for those of you who are from Virginia. This is a map that shares where we've actually funded projects through 2021. You'll see Grayson County is actually on this map. And my last slide, I think. And I know Chris talked a little bit about CARES Act funding. And so we did use some CARES Act funding to connect over 30,000 homes and businesses to internet. And some of these projects, which we typically don't fund through VODI, we were able to do some affordability projects. So I heard Chris talk about, being able to connect public housing. The city of Portsmouth actually built a public Wi-Fi mesh system to provide access to all of their public housing residents with some CARES Act funding.
Right.
And then this last slide, I think this is my last slide, really focuses on just the American Rescue Plan funding and how we now have $700 million of that funding and how our goal has been accelerated to get the job done by 2024.
Great. Great. Thanks so much, Tamarah. We're next going to hear from Erin Gill from the city of Knoxville.
Good morning. And I'm going to share my screen. It's really good to be here, and thank you to the organizers who invited me. And I've really enjoyed getting to listen to both the keynote as well as my fellow panelists. My name is Erin Gill, and I am the Chief Policy Officer and Deputy to the Mayor here in the city of Knoxville, Tennessee. And what I'm really excited to share is a case study in how a city has embarked on this journey recently as this summer, in terms of making the political decision at our city council level to authorize our local utility board to move forward with municipal broadband. A lot of the themes that came out in the keynote are really relevant here. And the one that I really want to focus on is that this is a case study that speaks at the intersection of policy, but also pragmatism. And I'll talk to you about the political decisions that undercut our decision to move forward with this, but also some of the pragmatic elements that made us very confident that this was the right decision for Knoxville right now. So without much further ado, let me kind of level set and introduce our mayor, Mayor India Kincannon, who ran with Municipal Broadband being one of the key platforms in her campaign. She took office in December of 2019 and had really emphasized during her political campaign the need for access to high quality, reliable, and affordable internet as being a basic need. What we saw then in terms of 2020 enter the pandemic was, just a full scale recognition that this was no longer an option. In looking at the need in our area, and these resemble many of the trends that were discussed earlier, we saw a significant number of households in our Knox County region, which includes both an urban area of the city, but also some more rural areas expanding into the county. 16% of households did not have internet access as recently as 2019. And we saw that there were huge disparities when you started addressing income access at lower income levels. And upwards of 40% of our lowest income households did not have internet access. That really became problematic. It had been problematic, but we saw the strains and the boundaries of that access limitation when we all went home in March of 2020 for the pandemic. And especially within education, we saw that an estimated 6,000 Knox County students lacked access to wired high quality internet, unable to do schoolwork, connect with their friends, connect with their teachers. And so really recognizing that the time was right to move forward with this from a political perspective, and that political leadership was instrumental in making sure that stakeholders locally who were in a position to act knew that this was a priority. I also want to emphasize the pragmatism side though, and really make sure that you all understand that the key partner in making this all possible is our local utilities board, Knoxville Utilities Board. They are a municipal utility. They operate very independently from the city. The mayor appoints the board, but they have full executive authority to act on their own. And the reason why we saw this as an opportunity now was because KUB recognized the need to invest in fiber as an integral upgrade to the electrical distribution system of the future. We heard a little bit about that in the case study mentioned at the keynote with EPB down in Chattanooga. And Knoxville and Chattanooga are very much peers. And we saw the benefits, not only that investment created for broadband and the community, but really for the electrical grid. And KUB had made this decision that they were going to be investing in fiber for the purposes of their electric system and bringing that 21st century grid to Knoxville. And it's on that decision that then we saw an opportunity to say, well, if we're investing in that fiber for the grid, what would it take to make that fiber accessible through a public broadband service? We saw a little bit of this, and I want to just emphasize, when it comes to the alignment between broadband and electric power, there are so many similarities, and especially within the Tennessee Valley region where we are built on public power, and public power is endemic to how we have gotten our electricity since the days of the New Deal and the Rural Electrification Act. Local power companies are really leading the way. This map is now out of date because obviously Knoxville is moving forward here in the KUB territory, but it showed us, when I saw this map, I was blown away, similar to some of the maps we've seen, that this is happening. This is not a big city driven trend. These green areas, with the exception of Chattanooga right now, had been rural communities who had made this investment out of necessity. And so there's so much precedent to make this possible, and really want to give a shout out to the innovative local power companies who have made this work. I'll go through these, and then I'm not going to get too much into some of these metrics later, but I really want to emphasize that KUB's approach to fiber mirrors some of those best practices that we heard from earlier. It's faster, so it's gigabyte service, and it's symmetrical, that identical upload and download speed, which is so critical for the modern workplace. Universal, and again, that last mile, getting to these customers regardless of where they are and how far away they are. That's such a critical component, and why public power is such an important model that we can use. We talked about homegrown and local oversight. As a municipal utility, we have local community members who will oversee this. We're not beholden to shareholders in New York, and we're not making decisions on a for-profit basis. We're making them based on what the needs of the community are. And ultimately, we see that being a better value, regardless of whether customers choose to take the public option here. We've already actually seen some of those prices come down in the private market as everyone is benefiting from that additional competitive pricing. I'll share these metrics only so you can see some of the scale, and I think we heard some questions around cost. This is a pretty significant system. KUB is one of the larger municipal utilities in the state of Tennessee. But I'll emphasize here that in the scale of their operations as a whole and the size of their infrastructure, generally speaking, they not only provide electric, but also gas, water, and wastewater. That $702 million starts to look much more reasonable when you lay it out in the context of KUB's annual budget. It's a significant job creator. And again, when we look at that marginal cost increase over and above what KUB was already going to do for the purposes of their grid, for the cost of a cup of coffee, the average resident is getting access to high quality internet. And even if they choose not to take it, more reliable options, another option to have. And when we look at, we heard a little bit about the benefits in Chattanooga. We've estimated locally, just based on the income effects associated with those savings on your bill, with the cheaper internet option or cheaper internet from private providers, we're looking at a $9 to $42 million benefit. And again, that's just the starting point when you think about then all the benefits for education, for employment, economics, and more. So I'll end here with some of the policymaker questions, since we went through this very recently, and some of the questions that our council asked. Happy to share more. I know I'll be quick here, but really it's this question of why now, and is the added cost worth it? Now, that first question, we very affirmatively said yes. And in fact, I will say that in the realm of local government, very rarely do you get to make popular decisions. And I think that making the decision to move forward with broadband was one of the most popular that our city council has had the chance to vote on. Mitigating the impacts of the rate increase is really important. And KUB has had a long-standing commitment, not only to provide bill assistance for low-income households, but also for energy efficiency upgrades and weatherization to make those homes more affordable, more efficient, and the bills more affordable. And I'll also recognize you talked about how investment in broadband can actually offset the need for future rate increases. And that is indeed what we are expecting to see in Knoxville. We will have a small rate increase over the course of 3 years, but then we will show no electric rate increases, at least for 7, which is significant. And then digital equity. We didn't want to build a system and still find people falling into that affordability gap. So we have been working very closely with KUB, with the city of Knoxville pledging support to a community low-income internet program. And we are still working through the design, but the intention there is to really make sure that, especially for households with kids who are low income, trying to participate in school, hopefully in person, but increasingly needing virtual access, if not just for homework, really making sure that we can provide a program that helps those households. And then who will get the new service first? This is the big question everyone's asking. KUB is committed to doing this. They know it's coming with their rollout. Who's going to get it first? And here, again, KUB can provide more details for those who would be interested in digging in, but they're looking at a couple different factors. One is, where do they have an existing fiber backbone in place with some of the early smart grid investments they've already made? Where is the highest need for internet, with a focus on underserved? And that includes both rural populations that don't have good internet or very few options, as well as higher density areas in our urban environments that have had limited access historically. And then finally, where the electric system needs. Again, this is built on the pragmatic investment in our grid. And so we want to make sure, KUB would want to make sure that they're addressing the needs of that grid as they roll this out. So they'll be strategically deploying that system. And it is the du jour question that everyone wants to know is, when can I get that internet?
Awesome.
So it's very exciting. And again, really appreciate you taking the time to learn about Knoxville's resources. There's some additional places you can find. And if you contact me, I'll make sure I'll get you in touch with the right person over at KUB to learn more. Thank you.
Good. Thanks so much, Erin. We'll next hear from Representative Jake Johnson from the state of North Carolina.
Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's a good place to start. I don't have any slides. I was just going to talk through some of the things we're working on right now, and I say working on because we are still very actively in a budget process. We haven't had a budget the last 2 cycles. North Carolina, we're truly a purple state, so we have a Democrat governor, 2 Republican legislative chambers, and no supermajorities in either. So that means that during budget time of year, we truly do have to come together and compromise and kind of try to see it from all sides. So that's the process we're in now. I always describe when I'm talking about broadband and the kind of my history of it, that I'm just old enough to remember my mom yelling, "Get off the computer so I can make a phone call." That's kind of how I describe where I came online as far as using the internet. A program that we're really excited about, and that I think we can roll out really quickly if we can get the language straightened out. We put our heads together with some of the big providers here in the state, put our heads together with lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, the new DIT secretary, and really, so what can we do with some of this money that we're getting from the federal government to invest it to where it's actually going to reach rural communities? And what we came up with was a program to go out and I don't have the House bill numbers right in front of me, but it's a bill we filed in the House to work with our electric co-ops that serve the most rural areas of North Carolina and use some of this money to help them do pole replacement. And when they do that pole replacement, we can actually put fiber along these poles. And that, I mean, just in the mountains, it is very hard and very expensive to drill many times. So we have to look at alternate ways to do it. And this is a program that we're going to put $100 million up front behind. And when that money runs out, the program's over. So it's not, immediately falling on the ratepayer to take over. When that money runs out, it's done. And we can look at whether we're making an impact or not. Some of these things are trial runs that, they may work. Maybe we have to go back to the drawing board, but we have to try. So that's something we're really excited about, working with our co-ops. I believe it should help them because it's going to help them on pole replacement costs that they were going to have to replace anyway. And we should be getting reliable internet to them as well. One other thing I wanted to point out is just the sheer investment that we're making. So just for comparison, and I serve as IT appropriations chair in the House. So this generally comes through our committee for discussion and appropriation. Over the past 10 years, or for 10 years, the investment was going to be $150 million. So I believe that was started 3 or 4 years ago. So we were a little ways into it, but it was going to be $15 million a year for 10 years, which is a lot of money, but a drop in the bucket compared to what we need. This next investment is going to be $750 million as quick as we can roll it out. So I believe Virginia was 700 million. Like they said, we're looking around 750 million. When that's leveraged with the private investment, we're going to be looking at well over $1 billion compared to the 150 million over 10 years that was previously invested. So I'm really excited to see those tangible results getting laid out. Now the problem is just the speed that we can roll it out. We know other states are looking at doing the exact same programs we are. So at this point, there is a bit of competition to it for materials, labor, getting those skilled people and materials on the ground to get it implemented. There's just a limited amount of resources and people that know how to do it. But that's a good problem to have, that the investment's there. We're just trying to get it done as quick as we can. My message to providers across our state, big or small, has been, I really, at this point, the pressure we're getting is we need it provided. I care less at this point about who's providing it or how they're providing it, that when somebody gets on the internet, I just want them to have fast, reliable internet. We've got kids right now that, especially during COVID, they were having to, go to McDonald's or things like that to get on the internet. And that's not what we want to see at all. We want to see it going straight to their homes. So I'm excited. And prior to this, I have to mention my background. I was a county commissioner prior to this. So I also understand it from the local government side, and I come from a very small rural county, Polk County, out in western North Carolina. I think we have 20,000 residents. Our county water system here has about 180 something people on it, I think. So we're very spread out. And it's just sometimes not feasible to run those traditional lines and things like that. So we have to think outside of the box and work with everyone who's a player and see if we can do anything to get it to those areas that are unserved or underserved. So North Carolina is a very, very diverse state, and we're doing all we can to get it to everyone who needs it. And I'm excited to answer any questions that come up, but I think I'm getting the cue.
That's awesome. Yeah, Jake, I cut your time a little bit because we're running late, but thanks so much. Yes, and do put your questions in so that our panelists can answer. We're now going to go to Gill, Juris, and Chris Cardwell, who are going to talk about the Cyber Seniors Program in Boone, North Carolina. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. All right, I think Chris is over there with me as well, so I'll get started. Hi, my name is Gill Juris, and I'm the faculty member creating the App State Cyber Seniors Program here at Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina. If you're not familiar with us, we are a part of the University of North Carolina system, and we currently have about 20,000 students. I work with the Beaver College of Health Sciences and the Blue Cross NC Institute for Health and Human Services to create intergenerational connections between university students and older adults. As social isolation and loneliness are identified challenges for older adults aging in their homes in rural areas, I began working with the local Area Agency on Aging to brainstorm possible ways to address this issue with intergenerational strategies. We were in the initial planning stages at the end of 2019 to create an intergenerational technology program. And then we all know how 2020 shifted everyone's plans. There quickly became a heightened need for technology support as everyone was physically distancing. Along with a graduate social work student, we began quickly creating a pilot program to serve the dual purpose of providing a service learning opportunity for university students and providing older adults with technology support. I'm going to let Chris Cardwell, who was that social work graduate student working with me last year, describe the Cyber Seniors Program, and then I'll give an update of our progress.
Hello, everyone, and thanks, Jill. I have graduated with my MSW, and I now work with Medical Services of America and provide home health and hospice social work services in Western North Carolina. And I want to share a little bit about Cyber Seniors. To tackle creating an intergenerational technology program, we connected with a Canadian-based nonprofit organization called Cyber Seniors. Cyber Seniors provides young people with a 2-hour online training program to become digital mentors. The training focuses on what to consider when working with older adults, such as physical challenges, communication, and attitudes or hesitations towards technology. The training also highlights how the Cyber Seniors program benefits older adults by bridging generational gaps and expanding social and physical worlds. Any older adult can join the Canadian Cyber Seniors program by going to their website at cyberseniors.org or by calling their toll-free number. Older adults can gain access to technology training and webinars on topics such as using email, Facebook, or Google, as well as an intergenerational community that keeps them socially connected and engaged. Our goal at Appalachian State University is to create a more regional connection between students who are living in the Appalachian region with older adults in a similar geographic setting. Therefore, Appalachian State University has partnered with Cyber Seniors to create the App State Cyber Seniors Partnership, where we train App State students to serve as technology mentors with local older adults. The feedback we received from our first year was encouraging, as both students and older adults benefited from connecting, but there were also some challenges utilizing technology to teach technology due to social distancing measures. Now in my current position as a medical social worker for home health and hospice, I see the need for App State Cyber Seniors, plus the internet connectivity that we've been discussing, to help healthcare workers do their jobs and patients and families connect to telehealth. And I'll pass it back to you, Jill.
Thanks, Chris. So we are now in our second year and continuing to learn how to build the community capacity to serve rural older adults and help them build digital skills. We have encountered challenges, as you can imagine, of varying technology literacy levels from both the university students and older adults. And as we've been discussing in this session, internet connectivity is a major issue. We had to limit our program to participants who had a device and internet access. We would speak with participants over the phone and guide people through steps to achieve their technology goal. But it will be a game changer with expanded broadband access to reach more people. We would like to expand our program to serve more rural older adults in future years. To remain safe, we have continued to be physically distanced this year. However, we would like to provide both in-person and virtual services in the coming years. As transportation and schedules continue to create barriers, App State Cyber Seniors has the potential to help meet the needs of rural older adults. Through in-person or online mentoring sessions, we hope to help older adults become more comfortable socializing online and using telehealth. As Chris mentioned, this program is available now to all older adults. We're currently accepting participants in our App State program, and I'll put the phone number and email that you can contact. And we'll have a Facebook page as well that you can find us and learn more at an info session next Thursday. Thank you so much to the organizers and including us on this panel. We're excited to be here and answer questions and provide more information.
Great, thanks so much, Jill and Chris. We now want to bring our panelists on and have a very brief Q&A just to wrap things up. And the key question that was asked, and I think Carl was answering it from his perspective in Grayson County. First of all, do we have the panelists on? I'll wait. Yeah. But the key question was, how can you find out more about what your community is doing and get involved in promoting increased broadband? And so, Carl, you want to say a few words? You have actually typed out an answer.
Yeah, definitely. I would, approach your, local government or municipal, entity and ask them what steps are being done to tackle, broadband issues in the community. You've got to let your voice be heard. If there is a lack of broadband, let your representatives know. And get other people involved and get the wheels moving.
Okay. And yes, Tamarah.
I would say in Virginia, we actually post all of our applications that come into our state broadband program on our website. So the first thing I would recommend is see if your county or town or city has actually submitted an application for our grant funding. And then if they haven't, then definitely, as Carl said, reach out to your local officials to find out what their plans are. So that would be my recommendation in Virginia. I will say that we have 95 counties and 83 submitted applications this last round. So at least in Virginia, more than 90% of our counties have submitted for funding requests.
Awesome. Thank you, Tamarah. Good. Now, what about at the state level? I'm going to go to Representative Johnson in terms of, can you comment on some of the recent activity that has been going on, to help municipalities with their broadband deployment?
So this was one of the first things I did when I took over as IT chair. And then I'll go back a little bit in time first. The question was, what can you do to kind of voice where the disconcern is? On the county commission, one of the last things I did before I left, we did a broadband survey and said, and made it available online. We put it in all public places, said where you live, what your provider is, what the service is. We don't know how to talk this through unless we know where the problems are. Then flash forward to being in the legislature, we made a significant investment in mapping. Because I said, I don't know where to provide the service if we don't know where. I mean, some of these areas in the mountains, there may be a coverage map that a provider gives us. And that's been one of my biggest complaints is these service, some of the provider maps do not sync up with where I'm getting feedback saying there's not service. What I don't like the big providers doing is doing things that say, well, we'll build it out in 10 years, but we don't want anyone else to right now. That's been a big issue. And that was a little bit of resistance. I think we met with our new co-op plan at first, that some people wanted to go into those areas later, just not now. And the reality is my constituents need it now. They don't want it in 10 years. They want it tomorrow. So it's whoever can get there, provide it reliable and the fastest.
Right.
What we'd like to see, and no one had ever had this conversation before with the counties in my area. When I got to my current role, I met with, I had all the county managers on a call and anyone large or small provider that was in the area, and said, for these matching dollars, do y'all understand that the county can actually go match dollars to these providers and can go, and we bring in nonprofits. So that we've got a community foundation here that has had some pretty large dollars left to it. And I said, we can bring in these outside organizations and match the money, and with that say, we'd like to see it ran here, here, and here. The reality is, it's very tough. When I mentioned our water system before, it cost a lot of money to get this infrastructure to places. And for a county whose budget was about $28 million when I was there, if you start adding up the cost, it's really difficult to take that on as a small local government. So we have to have those outside partners for it to make economic sense.
I think that's a key message in terms of the partnerships. And actually, if you go back and look at what happened in Grayson County, I think those partnerships were absolutely critical. Erin, can you comment in terms of what you've seen happening in Tennessee?
Yeah, so generally speaking, I mean, I think that, as I said, we've seen a lot of these communities start to take action out of necessity. I will say that, seeing a group of citizens really start to mobilize around the need for this is really important. And when policymakers get to the point of making a decision, those constituents have to show up, because the incumbents, so to speak, will come out in force and really try to rally opposition. And so having that grassroots support and real stories similar to what was shared in the video are so compelling and so needed. And so finding those advocates, telling those stories, bringing that to light, and making those points of connection, whether that's through grassroots organizing groups or even through social media, can be really important. And I wouldn't be shy about starting to get that ball rolling.
Okay, good. I don't want to leave out the importance of digital literacy. Just in the interest of time, though, I'm going to ask Chris Mitchell, do you have a few closing comments based on what you've heard and seen?
I think that there's a lot of exciting stuff happening, and sometimes it's hard to figure out how to plug in. And I think places to go might be a local library. Librarians are often very involved in this. Might be checking out economic development officials. They're often involved in this. And city hall officials are often, even if they don't have control over something, they're often getting the complaints. And so they may know where who's active on this locally to plug in. But I think that's one of the most important things to do, is to volunteer your time, educate yourself, and figure out how to try to change political decisions, because we need governments to have smart policy on this to fix it.
Awesome, thank you. Rebecca, did you have a few closing comments?
Yes, I do. Okay. Wow. Well, thank you, speakers, and thank you, participants. Special thanks to Lori Smith for introducing today's session, and to Sarah Knapp and Alan Briggs for being our moderators. Today, we gained knowledge, we shared best practices, and hopefully you had some new insights and made some new connections. You make decisions and influence people who make decisions. Please take one thing that you learned today and one spark of an idea and apply it to your community. Help your community take the next steps to connectivity, supply of hardware, and/or training. As many of you know, this was the second in a series of Livable Appalachia Summit. So please join us for our next episode on November 12th around housing. And of course, all of these are interrelated. Housing, the growth of our communities, broadband, transportation. So we hope you'll join us next week. And I just want to thank everyone so much for being with us today. You will receive a survey, and we value your feedback. So please respond to that survey. Thanks, everybody. Bye for now.